Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and I'm so excited to be back with you all in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I'm really excited. This is a fall season special with the Gay and Lesbian Review because I have one of their contributing writers. But even before I hit record, we were already chatting away about how I use his work in my dissertation. So, before all that, though, I want to reveal the mystery behind who this is if you're not actually seeing the video version. That's a little plug for all of you to join at $5 a month on Patreon. But regardless, if you're listening on the audio, I appreciate all the listeners, and I'm sure he does as well. So, first, I want to introduce you to another Dr. Andrew Lear, who actually founded Oscar Wilde Tours. And I am reading a really beautiful biography on OscarWildeTours.com. A little plug for you, Andrew, there. He holds a BA from Harvard and a PhD from UCLA. He's published widely on male love and ancient Greek art. We're definitely going to get into that, as well as a number of scholarly articles in the area. That was a little of our pre-show conversation. He's considered one of the foremost experts on same-sex love in the ancient world, but also in gay history, specifically in the late 19th century field of England, Renaissance Italy, medieval Japan, and he explores all of that with Oscar Wilde Tours. I've attended a lot of his Zoom tours, which have been wonderful. I know he also has in-person tours, which I want to talk to him about because I'm manifesting going on one of them in the future. Maybe next year, we'll see what happens. He has taught at Harvard, Columbia, NYU. He won the Harvard Certificate for Excellence in Teaching 4 times. He's taught in classics, history, art history, gender studies, Italian and French language classes, sexuality in the ancient world. And I think without further ado, everyone now has been properly introduced to you, Dr. Lear, Andrew. So welcome to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room.
Thank you, Andrew, for that glorious intro.
Well, I have to do your bio justice. So I think even before we get into everything that's so exciting with Oscar Wilde Tours and how you founded this as what I really see as a beautiful model of public humanities, and especially like you being here, I've looked at what you've done and modeled myself after you and so many others with opening up more public discussions about especially sexuality and, you know, LGBTQ history, literature, art. So before all of that, though, I'm just curious, when you look back at your career, you look back at why you went into, say, academia, right? Why you went into going to pursue a PhD. Was there always something in the back of your mind thinking, I want to really open up this field of sexuality and bring it to the public?
No, I always wanted to not do a PhD very badly, but the waves slowly bore me towards the university. I tried and tried. I taught at the university in Italy as a lecturer in English for many years, which only required an MA. But I was finding my work in Italy. It was fun living in Rome, you can imagine, but also for those who actually live in Rome, it's also like a pain in the butt, very kind of depressing. And finally, they brought me in. I spoke to a very, very famous Italian scholar named Dante della Terza. Much honor to Dante, who's now sadly no longer with us. And Dante just said to me, I will translate things. He said, Andrew, what would it cost you? A little PhD. And thus a decade of my life went into that pocket. But, it was a good idea.
Well, what were you studying? Oh, sorry, Andrew. When you were at Harvard, what was your degree in?
When I was an undergrad, I did English rather than classics, although I was always kind of on the border between the two. Actually, I don't know if you know who Robert Fitzgerald is, a famous translator of the Oxford. So I was having dinner with Professor Fitzgerald, and he said to me in his very emphysema influenced way, he said, a poet should major in English. And so
wait, this is the Robert Fitzgerald who infamously translated Homer's Iliad,
Well,
right?
not the
And
Iliad is
no?
not his best. His best translations are the Odyssey and the Aeneid. And
Okay.
normally, back before all the newer translations, we always used to teach from Lattimore's Iliad and Fitzgerald's Odyssey. And then definitely Fitzgerald's Aeneid, although now there's a great one by David Ferry, another wonderful older Harvard guy who's an, oh, I don't know, David might be alive, but if he's alive, he's not in good shape.
Well, and the new Odyssey that was really blew the roof off with the actual first female translator,
Right, right, yes, yes, I
which
can't
is,
remember. I
I
can't
know, I'll
remember. I met
find her
her.
name, but
No, no, I met her, but yeah.
it was incredible just to have this now in existence. But yeah, sorry, you were saying about your PhD at UCLA, how you
So
ended up there.
oh, how did I end up there? Oh, the long that would take forever. Um, I started. I did. It was hard because I would been out of school for a while and hadn't ever majored in classics. It wasn't very easy for me to do a PhD in classics. But the department at the University of Virginia, which is a quite distinguished classics department, took me, and I started my PhD there. But Charlottesville was just not the place for me. It's very charming and all, but I'm not a small town boy. Although I can do what I do in a small town, I don't really like to. So then I went on thinking about where I should go. And I think I actually went to California because one of my advisors was from Berkeley. And he kind of brought in a lot of different California people into my life. And then it ended up being a choice between several departments in California. And the UCLA classics department happens to be particularly good, and particularly good in Greek. And yeah, it was a great department. So that's
Yeah.
why I went
Oh,
there.
Emily Wilson did the new
Emily Wilson,
translation.
exactly, exactly.
Um, so, well, I know that I think now you're joining me from New York City. Or no,
No, no,
where are you joining me
you can
from?
see all the leafiness around me. Come
Well, I
on.
was gonna say, if you are in New York City, I
Yeah,
need to know where all these trees
that's
are
right. Is this
outside.
Sutton Place or something?
Oh
No,
no, I thought maybe you were in like a brownstone.
right.
No.
No, I am not. During COVID, I floated around quite a bit because I didn't really need to be in New York. And um, eventually I just decided I needed to buy a place somewhere. So I bought a condo in Providence.
Oh, okay. Okay. Very nice. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're very close to
yeah.
Boston and
Well,
P-Town.
my family's from Boston,
Oh, okay.
and I have a lot of P Town, as you mentioned, connections. But I wanted to be a little closer to New York,
Hmm.
so Providence,
It works. Yeah,
it's like Boston outer suburbs towards New York.
exactly. I mean, I'm on Long Island and
Oh,
I'm at on Fire Island a lot in the summer.
yeah.
Um, just because it's only 30 minutes away from me.
Oh,
So
nice.
yeah, so I finished at Stony Brook and live in Port
Oh,
Jefferson.
okay. Is it
Beautiful
quite?
area. Yeah.
Mm,
And it's like
yeah,
the mix of small, it's not small town, but it's not suburban. It's more what
right.
I call historic, a historic beach town, a porting town. So it's
Yeah, yeah.
interesting in
Port
that
Jefferson is
regard.
cute. Yeah, I
Yeah.
know that area.
So, but I'm with you in the needing that culture around. It's something that you went to UCLA, and I find that really interesting. Like, how was it being in the Los Angeles scene, especially with the work you do compared to, say, New York City?
Yeah, well, I mean, being an intellectual or kind of traditional intellectual in LA makes you very much an island in LA culture. So funny little bits and pieces, but it's a very big city, and so it has a number of such islands which are kind of connected. So I ended up teaching. It's the one place that is not listed, I guess, on my website. My main job was actually at Pomona College,
Oh.
so I taught in LA. But there's little Pomona group. There's UCLA, there's USC, there's the Getty. Between them, it's actually a fairly substantial world of ancient studies. And then we're not that far from San Francisco, of course, with Stanford and Berkeley, which are both really big hitters in the classical world. So, and there are actually some people, also good people at UCSB, Santa Cruz. California has a lot of classics going on.
Yes, yes. Even I know San Diego, especially with queer
Also,
studies, California is
yes. Oh, well,
at the
absolutely.
top when it comes to programs and departments.
Yeah, yeah.
Something that the Northeast, well, let's talk about it, Andrew. I think we have to since you're here. how are you weighing in right now with where are classics departments is my first question.
Well, not doing so well, of course. A little better than some other parts of the humanities, partly because classics already shrank.
Mhm.
Right? It's not shrinking anymore. But as far as doing things like sexuality and gender studies, classics is way behind the curve. It's a conservative field. Um, as I always say, you need a certain intellectual caution to be able to deal with the extremely fragmentary evidence of the ancient world. And unfortunately, this brings in cautious people. And
Mm.
cautious people, it's nice that they don't jump on every trend, right? Because then some trend like Lacanian stuff, like barely hit classics, and it was already gone before we even noticed. But on other things, classics is very slow. It was you know it astonishes people in other parts of the humanities when I tell them about the difficulties I had in getting anyone in classics to accept the idea of doing studies of male sexuality in the ancient world. But I'll just give you one quote. A very important classicist and also a great friend of mine and a big supporter of mine, probably trying to help me in life, asked me why I was writing a second book about such an unimportant topic.
Mm. Oh,
And
wow.
that'll just give you an idea of what the field is like.
Yeah. Well, do you feel that is there younger scholars who are really like, I'm always so just desirous of learning about intergenerational mentorship. And I think that maybe it's just, especially with the work I'm doing, seeing the way that academia recently on an episode that has just come out with one of my mentors from Kane University, that's where I got my undergrad, Dr. John Gruser, who's a post scholar. He actually calls it academia in free fall. And I thought that that was a really great metaphor to describe this. He's talking about like the English field, but I think we could apply it to really almost all fields. Like even extending outside humanities, there's a lot of concerns. And do you
When I was an
yeah, go
undergrad,
ahead.
I think English was the largest major at Harvard.
Mm,
And history was humongous. And back then, we did not regard history as in the humanities. History was in the social
interesting.
sciences. And now they say there's nobody majoring in the humanities, and they include history, which
No,
it's
it's
like,
true.
it's
That's
incredible.
why history is in the social science building at Stony
Totally.
Brook still.
Oh, yeah.
No,
It's
that's a good
never
point.
regarded as the humanities. And now, yeah, I mean, there are like 12 history majors and 7 English majors. And I mean, seriously, I remember asking the senior tutor in the English department when I was an undergrad. I said something about, well, I could just major. We had a more intensive major and a less intensive major. And I was trying to do a joint major in English and classics, and they weren't allowing it for some reason. And so I said, well, I could just do the less intensive major and then do what I want in classics. And what he said was, oh, yeah, he said, those are God's children, too. Like, the less intensive majors there were like hundreds of them
Interesting.
who even knew who they were.
Well, so how is UCLA's classics PhD? Like, is it still like, do you keep in touch with those in the like those at the
Yeah, well,
UCLA department?
I do. I don't know too much about what's going on in the department. My own fault. It's a wonderful department, and I really like a number of the people in it, and I'm certainly in touch with them still. But I'm not maybe very up to date about what's going on. It's a pretty prosperous department, though. It's done pretty well on the whole. And yeah, both of my PhD advisors are still there. So
Oh, that's wonderful.
yeah,
Yeah. And
and wonderful people both.
well, but like you said, classics was already a like even when you went for your PhD, which you don't have to unless you want to tell me the year.
Oh,
Um,
oh yeah, 2004.
okay, okay.
It's not that long ago.
So yeah,
It
not
was
that long
late.
ago. And how was it, going for your PhD with already a lot of different humanities experience? Like where were you coming? How are you coming to your PhD is probably the better question.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. First of all, it did not make it easier to get in.
Mm,
It just made people suspicious. In fact, I applied for 2 years. The first year I applied, I got into a couple of places, but nowhere I particularly wanted to go. And then I can't remember who looked over my application and said, "Oh yeah, take all this stuff out," like Robert Fitzgerald, just like remove all of that. And later on, I once talked to a very prominent and wonderful professor from UCLA, great guy who runs a huge international project about making 3D online versions of Rome now. He's not at UCLA anymore. Great person though. But he said he heard something about me and he said, "Why did I not know all this about you? I mean, you speak Italian, you speak French, you speak German. This is all great stuff. I was on the admissions committee, Andrew. I don't know any of this." And I said, "Yeah, that's right, Bernie, because when I put all that stuff in my application, they didn't let me in." So I removed it all before I applied again. And then I just said, put in a letter from someone at Harvard who said, his Latin is very strong, his Greek is extremely good. Very firm grasp of ancient Greek grammar. I said, okay, let him in. So yeah, it is that's classics is a very, tight field.
Yeah, and there's self-selecting. I know some who are um currently, like those I know who are in classics who are PhD students or who have just defended their dissertation. It is just interesting to see they all really know each other, but there is such a network that doesn't always exist in, say, history, English, just because of the numbers. And I think too, this is something
Totally.
that no, and I so admire what you do with Oscar Wilde Tours because something that I've always advocated for at Stony Brook was we really need to know where our alumni in the PhD program, what types of professions they went into, since the majority are not at a
Right.
college.
Yes.
But that list doesn't exist.
Yeah, in
It
classics it does. There's a nonprofit institution called Paideia, and Paideia is all about classicists outside of academia. And I've
oh,
given
that's
talks for them.
wonderful.
Yeah, it's a great organization, all in all.
Yeah.
Paideia.
I think we really need that type of
Mhm.
not just not university specific, like you're saying about Padea. Is that what it's called?
Paideia.
You just said.
Yeah.
So right, this isn't just about Stony Brook. It's about because as we already know, universities, um, department staff are already overworked. So then to try to give another task to them isn't fair. That's where we need something that's more structural of, okay, let's track those who finish their dissertation like in a year, what happened, like where are they? What are they working on?
Oh,
What projects?
well, in every field, there's a professional association which could be doing that.
Well, the MLA technically
Right, the MLA. Sorry, I
should
forget
be.
because we're not in the MLA.
Yeah, the
Classics is its
MLA
own little
is
world.
yes, is it the MLA is the literature's big honcho.
Right.
Um, but no, the MLA does, you have to though create your own profile. So that's the thing is you have to self-select
Okay.
into
Yeah.
the MLA and
Yeah.
become a member for them to start to follow what work you're doing. But again, I know some who they finished their PhD and then they basically, using an ancient Greek myth metaphor, the court of life. Like they wanted nothing to do
Sure.
because of their experience. And, it saddens me, but it's also that reality of, um, well, what I am so interested in, Andrew, is how do you find all your different talents working together? Like, how hard is it to manage, say, your touring business with academia, with your teaching? How do you get all of these elements and tentacles working in tandem?
That's a very difficult question because I am in fact going insane. I think I have I can never remember. Do I have 6 or 7 businesses that I run at the moment? And I actually sometimes try to just remember what they all are and whether there's something I need to do about each one. And sometimes I can't remember one. I think, damn, what was the thing I'm forgetting? And then I can't sleep because I can't remember an entire major project. But yeah, I do think so. I'm working at the moment on a bunch of movie and TV projects, and I think in some ways those bring a lot of the things together. for me, and I hope they work out. Of course, the strikes are not helping, but I mean, the strikes are very justified, extremely justified, completely justified, but nonetheless, they are kind of in my way. But some of those things, I'm trying to do, among other things, an LGBTQ history TV series.
Oh.
Which I actually had the BBC green light at one point, but it still hasn't happened. So we've kind of reconfigured it, and we're trying to get some different people involved. But we have some wonderful patrons, I would say. So Jane
Oh,
Lynch
wonderful.
has been helpful, and Zachary Quinto, in some ways, wonderful guy.
Oh, wow. Will this be similar to what Eric Servini did with Discovery, the Discovery Channel?
You really don't want to hear what I think. Yes.
I mean, it's your thoughts. Does not reflect the
yes,
author,
but mine
Andrew
will be
Rimby.
for adults.
Okay.
That's all. That's all I have to say.
So you're just saying there's a different audience that you're targeting.
Yeah. Yeah, I really felt like that was done for, like, almost for children.
Yeah.
And,
well, it was definitely teaching. Well, I think that's where, as an academic, right, Eric has a PhD in history.
yeah, I think gender
No,
studies.
is it gender studies?
I think so. I
Okay.
could be wrong.
No, well, I'll find. As in real time, I always figure it out. Don't worry. But from what I just like, Eric and I have messaged each other. I think
I know,
what I've,
Eric, of course.
yeah, no, and I think what I so appreciate is he's leading. Well, I don't want to say leading, but he's part of this movement of the social media exposure, and
Absolutely.
especially bringing academia to the broad public, but specifically those who are LGBTQ from, like, say, Gen X, Gen Z, um, and the millennials, of course, and teaching them history that they probably have never been taught, right? And it seems like you're already assuming your audience has at least they can dig deeper into more nuance. Is that the difference?
I'm not quite sure. Maybe. Um, yeah. No, I'm not quite sure. There's, by the way, also, I should give a plug to a different podcast. There's another person, roughly Eric's age, doing a podcast on LGBTQ history called Historic Homos or Historical Homos. I can't remember. Who's a guy called Sebastian or Bash Hendra, who's kind of interesting. You might want to take a look.
Okay. Yeah, and I have also had on the show Bad Gays.
Sure. Also.
Yeah,
So.
Ben Miller. I'm about to have Eric Marcus on soon,
Oh,
everyone, from
wonderful.
Making Gay History. Yes. So no, that's the thing is
Love
I'm
Eric's work.
connected to all the public scholars in LGBTQ studies. So right, I don't think you said anything that is in a negative light. You're
No,
just
no.
airing that these are different platforms, production companies, right? Sometimes you as the artist don't have a choice.
No, of
Like
course.
what
Oh,
Discovery
of course.
says,
Yeah.
they lead the guard and the direction.
Totally. They
Yeah,
entirely
but
do. Yes, I'm
so
handing things off to a couple of them right now. We'll just have to see how that goes. But
yeah, well, I'm crossing fingers. Oh, yes, Eric received a PhD in history in 2019 at Cambridge and researched gender and sexuality in ancient society.
okay.
Um, but just so if Eric's listening, I
It's a
have the
great,
right
it's a
record.
great book.
Oh yeah, The Deviants War.
Fabulous.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, so your work though, Andrew, on pederastia on ancient Greek sexuality is definitely what I've used in my dissertation. It's what so many, when I mention your name in academia, they automatically will say, oh, yes, he wrote about ancient Greek same-sex desire, but specifically Greek vase, nudity, and penises, right? Like there's this image of
Because
what Andrew Lear does in academia. But like, how does that, right? How do, say, the erotic Greek vases translate into when you're talking to those on a tour or those on a Zoom tour? Like, do you feel that you're easily able to use the same language? Do you have to really factor in jargon, the audience?
I mean, that's a big question. I mean, I think the broadest points about work on ancient Greece might have to do not with the specifics of vases, but more generally on something to do with representation and how how to what extent the representations of gender and sexuality things in a genre like art reflect social customs or differ from social customs. And also, I think that work on sexuality in ancient Greece, this is the way it's always been seen, right? Or I shouldn't say always, certainly been seen since Foucault, opens up a lot of questions about the way we define sexuality rather than just being about ancient Greece. Right? It is, after all, the nice thing about ancient Greece is that people in the modern West know a fair amount about it, even if you think they don't know much, but they know something about it. Everyone, they've all had Greek myths, and they read like the child's Iliad when they were little kids. It's really part of our education still, and they're concerned with it. People are really interested. Classics departments may not help very much in getting the public more interested or informed, but you teach a course like Greek myth or Greek Civ people may not major in classics, but they certainly want to take classes like that. It's a very widespread interest. And so you can talk about ancient Greece. And if you look at a culture which viewed and practiced sexual desire and sex too, which of course we don't know as much, so differently from our own, it really opens up all kinds of questions about the definitions of sexuality, categories, valuations, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a really, now there are many cultures in which sexuality has been dealt with very differently from ours. But ancient Greece is the one that people know a little bit about and care about. So it's a good place to start.
Well, and then in the gay and lesbian review, when you have something like secret penises as at the Met as one of your articles, definitely you know how to use tantalizing language, just like what I love of a type of shock value, but it's also part of your work. Because I can ask you this question, and it's something that also resonates with the type of writing I do, or even like bringing on guests who talk about gay porn studies, right? I've had Tim Dean on, I've had um, Thomas Wall, and like my number one question always is what do you do with explicit, especially explicit queer male nudity? Do you think that you're put through the ringer in a different way than, say, if it was about heterosexual, even though, right, heterosexual is an anachronistic term or something
Sure.
out of
No,
time
about
with
something to do with,
antiquity, but something that the general public would see as heterosexual
right.
sexuality and antiquity? Like, how have you thought through that process? Like, do you think you face more obstacles because it is same-sex related?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would not say that I have experienced a lot of discrimination in my life for being gay, but as an academic, I was working on a topic of which the field of classics is to some extent terrified. It's really interesting. There's a whole history to be written of the way in which classicists have tried to, what is the word? Tried to limit the damage of Greek pederasty. So for a long time, of course, people simply translated converting he to she. Right, that went on for centuries and centuries. We don't do that anymore. But there's still just so many ways in which classicists try. What was one that I was thinking about recently? Oh, well, there's probably the best known book about ancient Greek love at the moment is a book called The Greeks and Greek Love by James Davidson. And James tries to argue desperately that the younger males in Greek pederastic relations were 18 and above. And he does this by ignoring all the evidence against his point, and misconstruing evidence and so on and so forth. But it's not that unusual. It's an attempt, you might call it a Bowdlerization of ancient Greek culture. But there are many versions of that. I was just reading a scholarly article, not bad in some ways, in which somewhere in there he said something like, we all know that sex with adolescents is wrong. He seemed to be including the ancient Greeks. But no, the ancient Greeks did not know it was wrong. That's not true. They did not think it was. Rather, we think it's wrong, and they didn't think it was wrong. I always feel in moments like that, like saying, well, study some other culture if it makes you so uncomfortable. There are so many worse things about the history of the world, right? And about ancient Greece. Like when one Greek city conquered another Greek city, they might kill all the males, rape the women, and carry away the children, including with boys. They might castrate them and sell them as slaves to the Persians. That's worse. Mm-hmm. On an ethical scale, much worse. They had slaves, mm-hmm. per se. That's really terrible. The ancient Romans had gladiatorial combat, which is really ghastly. And so on and so forth. But for some reason, people don't try to pretend that gladiatorial combat didn't happen. Mm-hmm. Whereas they do try to pretend that Greek pederasty didn't happen. And I connect this actually to a form of panic that is very profound. I think that we learn rules for gender and sexuality in the cradle. And we learn them years and years and years before we practice, gender not. You practice gender from the moment you start to move your toes, probably. But we don't practice sexuality very much until we reach, it's like 13 years. You have 13 years of sexuality lessons. Rules, you're told the rules over and over again by society, by your parents, reflecting society, so on and so forth. So we're very attached to these sexuality rules of our culture. And another culture having different ones, particularly a culture we admire, it can be very panic inspiring for people. And something that really strikes me as similar, I read some young movie star, I can't quite remember who, had kissed a guy in a movie. And he said, people always ask me if that was really disturbing. And he said, I've also stood next to someone and blown their head off in a movie, which through special effects looked like I was blowing their head off. Nobody asked me if that was disturbing. Mm. So there is this sexuality. Yeah. So anyway, yes, it's a big problem. Just cheerfully. The way I do it, if I have to think about it, is that I sell it by generally treating things in a fairly lighthearted and humorous way, which works fine.
And what percent, I'm putting you on the spot here, but if you had to put a percentage just for everyone out there, how many were actually engaging in ancient Greek pederastia, who were considered Athenian male citizens, those who actually had rights as citizens?
Could have been 100%. We certainly don't have any idea. We don't have any evidence that anyone didn't. I mean, it was considered a normal part of life that men, adult men, we really mostly hear about the sexuality of adult men. And I know that sounds horrible and patriarchal, and so it is. But it's also because adult men had choices. So mm-hmm. they can be praised or dispraised according to the choices they make. Whereas that's harder to apply to women or young people because they're not. Boys definitely have choices and they get praised and dispraised as well. But it is definitely was considered normative for a man, an adult man, to desire both women and adolescent males. There are some occasional cases where somebody represents themselves as particularly enthusiastic about relations with, say, pederastic relations, but that's self-representation. They regarded, among other things, marriage as pretty much behind a wall of silence. So if you were enthusiastic about sex with your wife, God knows you would never have said anything about it.
That's interesting.
Oh yeah, that would have been scandalous.
Well, and also if you were having an adult lifelong relationship with another man, that was also taboo. Right. Totally so when taboo. People in the public say, yeah, I'm sure you hear it all the time. Sure. Oh, there were gay people in ancient
There were gay
Greece.
people, right? They're gay people.
It's no.
No, what I tell them is society, sexuality worries societies because it's a difficult force to contain. And so societies spend a lot of time making rules, all kinds of rules for sexuality, and rules change constantly. But nonetheless, enforcement of rules, policing rules is very important. But every society has different rules. And their rules were just very different from ours.
Well, and in my work, like why I used Andrew's work is because Andrew has such an extensive and just you have such a good way of looking at visual illustrations. Like with Greek vases, I find you also target the intersection between what I really needed to figure out, which is how a symposium scene is visually represented, right? And for all of you out there, Plato's Symposium is a great text to read if you don't really know what was this idealistic version of the symposium in philosophy, but that this high intellectual act of philosophizing then mixed with pederastic desire or the adult male with the prepubescent boy,
Pubescent.
not prepubescent. Oh, actually
Pubescent.
pubescent? Really?
Pubescent.
See,
Yeah.
I've read different accounts
Well,
of
we have very little evidence. Read my article. We have very little evidence. There is one poem, which is not very good evidence because it's from the Hadrianic period, so already pretty late. But he goes through the ages of boys specifically, and 12 to 17 is what he regards as okay. 18 is not okay because that's already a man. But the idea of having sex with someone under 12 is literally never mentioned.
Yeah, but they were beardless. That is true.
In theory.
Well, idealistically, right? Because
Yeah,
this is what I wanted to
ideally
talk to you
beardless.
about.
Yeah.
Is like I use the literary sources. So if I'm using
Right.
some Plato's Symposium,
Right.
that is an idealistic version. That is not, it's like
Yes.
what I say. If we read high intellectual theory from nowadays, you would think it would be as if you thought it was an accurate representation. But
Yes, exactly.
theory never actually reflects everyday life of people.
No, well, what I say about that is that we have, in our own lives, we have many, many layers of discourse about sexuality, which may start with our actual experience, perhaps inchoate, of our own desires, activities in which we engage, some of which we may try to pretend didn't happen to ourselves. We go, there's this endless complicated way up through what we say to people our lovers, to what we say to our family members, all the way up to what's represented in the movies. Many, many layers up. From ancient Greece, we have only the movies. And so we are left entirely only with what the rules are or what is regarded as okay. But if you just think about the representation in movies, let's leave the same-sex realm and say, well, the representation in movies of marriage, right? You fall in love with someone when you're 27. That's sort of an appropriate age to get married in America today. And then you stay in love for the rest of your life, both of you. Both people are equally in love and obligated to be equally in love, and you stay in love for the rest of your life. Now, take a zillion marriages, which there are, and see how many of them live, how do they relate to that ideal? Right. So it's a similar kind of, except we just don't have any of the lower level information about ancient Greece. It's
I
almost
love
like
this Hollywood movie metaphor that you created, Andrew. Again, this is where trained in English, I've had to explain to those trained in history, my writing is not about reflecting everyday life. My writing is about how authors like Whitman or Wilde were influenced by what they read. And because I've gotten into some debates with those who question my reading of male homoeroticism as being purely interested in things that go against historical record. But I said it wasn't against what the author thought, right? There's those of us who read fiction, we see representations of LGBTQ desire. Like you said, some want to emulate the movies. They want to emulate something that's fictional, and then it gets into their
no,
work.
I think everyone wants to. but they do to different. And of course, in Wilde's life, we have, I would say, we see different levels, because when he defends himself at his trial, he defends specifically his relationship with Bosie Douglas on the basis of ancient Greek pederasty. But in fact, most of Wilde's sex life, and Bosie's sex life even more, consisted of sleeping with boy prostitutes, to whom he might have been nice. He does seem to have been. He gave them like silver cigarette cases. But he wasn't, it wasn't Greek pederasty, right? He wasn't. No. There was, well, what my students, I should give you this phrase because you'll like it, called tutoring with benefits. It wasn't tutoring with benefits. I know.
That's an interesting way to describe pederastia.
Like yeah.
But, well, and do you know, because there's that really, if you learn more about Wilde, there's the really scandalous, tantalizing information about how there was actual stains on the bed sheets of like him having anal sex, which
or Bosie having anal sex.
Ah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So were they together? It was
but Bosie,
or was there was there a prostitute?
Yeah, no, I don't think, but Wilde had anal sex with Bosie, but I think we may know that. But he Bosie certainly might have been having sex with a prostitute in Wilde's room, possibly with Wilde watching.
Ah, a little voyeuristic activity.
Yeah, okay. Why not? Yeah.
They were a little kinky. But right, wasn't that was used as evidence though during the trial?
Yes, no,
from the hotel staff.
Yes, but I don't think it was accepted legally. The evidence, it was dismissed because there could be stains on sheets from many things.
Yes,
and you could also have, diarrhea.
Right.
There's no
anyone who's eating right now, they're like,
sorry guys, there's no reason that fecal stains need to be from anal intercourse.
I think it's so interesting because the love that dare not speak its name, which so many associate with Wilde, was actually from Bosie's poem.
Yes, I know. And I just saw a BBC, I think, piece on TV where they quoted it as Wilde.
No, it's again, like I said, it's how a whisper down the lane happens, right? Or because I really love the Greeks and Greek love. Like I actually turn to it for some historical, not the pederastic element, but I turn to James for more just like setting the scene with the Athenian male citizens and giving a little of that record. But something that I love is you are so frank, Andrew, and I like that you're unfiltered, but also you're engaging in an intellectual debate. And that's something I feel, though, is, first of all, I don't know, is James gay? I'm assuming he is. Okay. Yes. I don't like to assume, but okay. So do you feel like, though, as a community of scholars, like already being a gay male scholar, I can just speak for myself as a gay male scholar, right? Everyone out there, they might say, Andrew, you keep talking about gay men, but I'm like, okay, I can speak for my identity here as a scholar. Do you feel we support each other? Because that's something I'm trying to come to terms with is, can you support each other, but also engage in a vigorous debate? It's like, okay, I appreciate the book you published, but I also deeply disagree. And that's okay. That's how this sausage gets made. That's how the world turns in academia.
I would say that happens to a certain extent. Like, let's leave James aside for a moment. Tom Hubbard, another publicly famous classic scholar who writes about ancient Greek pederasty, and I disagree about some things very strongly. Tom believes that Greek pederasty was exclusively a custom of the upper classes. I have a bunch of evidence that that's not true. We've argued about it 100 times. Tom is very supportive of my work. The encyclopedia article we're talking about was published in a volume edited by Tom. And I directly say in it several times that I disagree with Tom.
What is that article for everyone out there, Andrew?
That's an article. It's an encyclopedia article in the Blackwell companion to, I think it's called Companion to Greek and Roman Sexualities, that is called, I think, Ancient Pederasty. Mm-hmm. And it's an article I'm really very happy to have written. And Tom requested it, cut it a little bit because it was too long for his volume, and I certainly have that relationship with a number of people. On the other hand, there's a lot of pretty bloody disputes in the field of classics between gay male classicists who like, go through the throat. I'm not actually involved, but sometime I could find for you the online disputes between James Davidson, David Halperin, and Tom Hubbard on in the perhaps comment sections of the Bryn Mawr Classical Review. I mean, they're not supporting each other. No, at all.
But like, again, maybe I'm so Pollyanna, but already like it's such a small field.
Sure.
But again, sometimes the most petty arguments are because you have run out of the pieces of the pie. Like you're already fighting for a small space. Do you think it's that, or do you think it's just this is so passion? It's the passion that's fueling the debate.
Yeah. So there's a lot of ad hominem arguments. I mean, certainly James's book is full of ad hominem attacks on Dover and Foucault. Yeah, there's a kind of ad hominem stuff going on all sides there. Sometime also for your amusement, it's in the Hist Sex, whatever that is it a wiki or something? There's a 17-page single-spaced review of the Greeks and Greek Love by Tom Hubbard.
Ah.
You should read it.
Well, I am in favor of all of you out there, James. I've used your work. I use Andrew. I use David Halperin, Dover.
Sure.
I bring you all together.
And I quote James. James has made some very good points. He's made some very good points. He was very firmly arguing that people like Dover and Foucault emphasize sex too much in their discussion of ancient Greek pederasty, where ancient discourses about it is not about sex. It's much more the tutoring than the benefits.
Yeah. Well,
and that's clearly what was culturally emphasized.
Yeah, and I'm more on Hubbard's. Like I really, like I've said, what I borrow from you, not borrow, but what you've taught me is about the visual representing, like how do we understand something so artistically visual on a vase to represent something that was a reality? Like where's that line? Understanding those boundaries. And like from Tom Hubbard, I do agree more on the upper class, but I don't say it with pederastia. I agree more when you're talking about the symposium meeting pederastia.
Oh, of course.
That's my
symposium.
Like the symposium is an upper class.
So
art.
yeah. I mean, I probably in that article, in the pederastia article, I marshal a bit of evidence against the idea that pederastia was exclusively an upper class custom. What I would say very simply is that the middle classes and the lower classes tend to ape the upper classes.
Mm-hmm.
They may not have been able to participate in pederastia at a Plato level, but that doesn't mean they weren't participating in whatever way. There's some great little bits. Xenophon warns you in the Economicus against hiring a farm bailiff who's too in love with a boy because he'll be too distracted. Well, farm bailiffs are not upper class. And so on and so forth. There are little bits and pieces like that that seem to me to indicate that obviously we don't have any idea whether any of this is really reflects reality. But in an ancient Greek mind, it was not necessarily exclusively an upper class custom.
Well, it's kind of that metaphor you did with materialism in a way, representing our everyday American society. It would be as if I think historians look to the Met Gala thinking that was what everyday people participated in. But then, like you see, the middle class then tries to represent the Met Gala with their own parties, and then it just trickles down into, well, I need to buy such and such Gucci. I need to get that bag because it represents what someone had worn in the 1%. And yeah,
and I feel like Kmart designs their clothes with the Met Gala in mind.
Exactly. Every brand of fashion is looking up to who's the trendsetter.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, of course.
Yes. So, as we're nearing the end, which this has gone by so quickly, Andrew, but I know we'll be in touch and I'll have you back on again when I need to talk about these in-person tours because it's been I think I'm having dreams about how idyllic they could be. But just to set the scene, like when did this all start where you would actually go in person to Greece, to Italy, like on the ground, you're actually leading groups
Yeah.
on LGBTQ history of these places. Like how did this happen?
So it started when my academic, well, we can't really say my academic career fell apart, but I was at NYU and NYU couldn't, it was a temporary position. They couldn't renew it. And I really didn't want to go anywhere else. I just said, okay, fine. Listen, NYU is where I want to be. I'm fine here. And I'm not leaving New York to go get some other job. And one of my advisors, of course, spend their lives trying to get you to get an academic job. But one of my advisors said to me, Andrew, if it were anyone else, I would say just keep pushing and you'll get that job at Indiana State. But I don't see you there anyway. He said, you are a professor. You've been a professor. You've done it. Go do something else. And so I was just trying to think what to do. And I happen to have a long background in the travel industry, summer jobs, because of my French, German, and Italian. I'd like run tours for people for years and years and years and years. And I just thought, well, maybe I could, I could bring together the gay history and the travel industry. And so I did. Put together Oscar Wilde Tours and started doing tours in Europe. It's actually not the way I usually tell it. The tours in Europe were first, but then it occurred to friends of mine that I could be doing day tours in the museums. Oh no, well they just said you should do some tours in New York, and I said, well, I immediately thought, oh, I should do a tour at the Met, and put together the tour of the Met, which I think is probably the best known thing I do. Really, is it used to be called the Gay Secrets at the Metropolitan, which I'm sorry is a better name than LGBTQ Secrets at the Metropolitan. But it
And not only
very
penises, just for everyone who reads the
no,
Gay
that's a
Lesbian
different
Review article. That's different.
that's a different tour. That tour was invented by NPR.
Oh.
Kurt Anderson wanted to interview me about penises at the Met, and he did. It was a great interview actually, and they called it Unhung Heroes of the Metropolitan.
I love it. Wow, they actually went there. I'm
That was on
surprised.
NPR. Yeah, exactly. And one day I was just giving a tour and there were some women on it, and they said, why don't you turn that into a tour?
Mm.
So that's how the penises became a tour of the Met. It was not my idea at all. It's a very good idea. But it's about penises and breasts because they're the two body parts that vary culture to culture the most. The representation of penises and breasts is highly influenced by culture, whereas the representation of female genitalia is actually pretty universal, which is to say, they're like Barbie. It's like a space between your legs. That's the genitalia of women in art, except in Courbet. I mean, it was obviously like a rebel. But so yeah, that's this whole business started, and all kinds of cool things have come out of it, including I'm right now planning my first LGBTQ history tour of India.
Oh wow. When is that supposed to launch, Andrew?
February.
Okay. And you do this, it seems like it's a roster that happens every year. Is that true? Like, do you do it every year or it's every few years?
No, it's every year, but I'm actually going to put Italy and Greece to bed for a little while and do other things because I have interesting people to work with in India and Japan. Yeah. And those are going to take enough time and effort that I don't think I can.
Oh no, I better get my Italy and Greece in then because I'm like, I have to go on a tour with Andrew in Greece because I've never been to Greece.
Oh yeah. It's a great. It's this. It's nice to connect. So what we're trying to do, two things. One is we're trying to make a TV show out of them, and the other thing is we're trying to put some of the tours on an app, so that you could do them. When so many people always say to me, "Oh, I'm going to be in Italy in September. Do you have any tours?" They say, "No, guys. There's just one of me. So yes. We have a tour once a year when I'm in Italy. You cannot have a tour when you want one. It's just not the way it works." Well, but if they were on an app,
or even if you had a podcast, you could actually lead people on a podcast through each destination.
Well, that's a great idea. Well, I'll tell you a sad story. Stephen Fry and I proposed an LGBT history podcast to Audible during COVID, and they turned us down. Can you imagine turning Stephen Fry down?
No, I can't.
No, I
Not
can't.
Stephen Fry.
No, I have to say, when Stephen said, yes, that's a great idea, let's do it, I'll tell my agent. I thought, I just assumed that was going to happen. It didn't occur to me that they would turn us down.
But this shows you how channels like taking a chance. They see it as taking a chance on
Right.
LGBTQ work and
Niche. It's niche.
niche. Yes,
It's
yes.
niche.
Yeah. Well, but something that I want everyone out there to know is you also do Zoom lectures, Zoom tours that everyone go to OscarWildeTours.com. They can all, right? They can join.
Yeah,
Everyone who's listening.
These days I've been doing, not in the summer, but the rest of the year, I've been doing like one free one a month that you can reach through Out Professionals and through the Gay and Lesbian Review. And I hope I put them on Oscar Wilde Tours. In the very least, they're on our Facebook group. Like I did one about LGBT resistance heroes in Nazi Europe, which was really, it's a cool subject. A lot of material, actually. And one about that was called Gender, Queer, and Art in History. And just, have to keep coming up with subjects. So all kinds of stuff will happen. But I think in September, I'll be doing the Nazi Europe one again, because I'm going to be in Berlin with a tour group, Oscar Wilde Tours group, the day it's going to happen. And so they said, oh, well, obviously you're in Berlin, you should do the Germany one again. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm already like, as a producer mind, I'm already thinking of your future podcast. Cause like I can already see it that you have like episodes where like you bring your lectures, like you would condense them into an episode with a co-host, like someone in that field who you know. And then like at the end, you could have a 10-minute like leading a person through a spot that like relates to that discussion. I definitely think there's a way that you could get this out to the broad public.
Everybody is always saying I should have a podcast, and I never actually arrive at doing it. But if you have an idea, tell me about it, and maybe we can make it happen.
Okay, we'll talk about that off air. Because I think it would be wonderful that people could actually go to these spaces. Like even
I totally agree.
I'm in the New York area, but even if someone's at the Met, that they can listen to a discussion about penises and breasts, or the ancient section, which is just stunning at the Met. It's always my favorite place at the Met, and they could actually like hear you discuss what they're going to encounter, and they can actually walk and be immersed in your words. I think there's definitely a way, and there would be a way for you to get a little monetization out of ads. So we'll talk about that.
We can talk about that. I'm always interested.
We will. But everyone, definitely, this was just so wonderful, Andrew, to meet you.
Thank you.
Finally, like I've been around you in the universe and ether of the work you do, but having to sit down with you has been a pleasure. So everyone, OscarWildeTours.com. How can they follow you, Andrew? I think you're definitely on social media.
Facebook. In fact, this last couple of weeks, or maybe last week, my Facebook person, my social media person, has started. We're doing video shorts. They're on Facebook Reels, both under OscarWildeTours.com and my other tour company, ShadyLadiesTours.com, which is a company about royal mistresses and courtesans. It's a very fun company. And in fact, our first ShadyLadiesTours.com reel was up like 2 days ago. It already has 16,000 views. So I think it can be said to be, in its small way, successful. And soon, I believe, we will be on TikTok.
Yes,
although
I saw news about
do not
that.
have TikTok. We'll probably never see it in my life, but we will have it.
Yes. Well, we have TikTok at the Ivory Tower Boiler Room, and I know that once Oscar Wilde Tours or Shady Ladies, however it's represented on TikTok, I'll share it out, repost. We'll make sure you get traction on TikTok. So,
thank you.
And Andrew Lear's on Instagram too. Yes, you are. I know.
That's possible.
Yes. So whoever is doing your social media has given you good exposure.
Okay.
But thank you, Andrew.
Very good.
This has been wonderful. And, I think everyone here has run the gamut of all different conversations. So there's something for everyone in this discussion. But yes, thank you.
Cool.
I
All
had
right. Thank
such
you,
a
Andrew.
pleasure. And thanks to the audience out there. And I will see you all next week in the Ivory Tower Boiler Room.
Bye.